Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. I know usually we drift back through 1,000 years of royal scandals, dynastic disasters, and enough inbreeding chance to make a Habsburg blush. But tonight, let's step sideways, into the woods, because apparently, if you're me, and you've got 27 years of municipal building inspection under your belt, you don't retire to Florida. You get dragged into possibly the most infamous case of unauthorized construction the Woodland District has ever seen. Yes, we're talking about that one, the Three Little Pigs incident. You've heard the story. The newspapers sure didn't shut up about it. Big Bad Wolf supposedly terrorizing three innocent little porkers, huffing and puffing like some unhinged HVAC system. But as usual, the public only got the bedtime story version. I was there, clipboard in hand, pen running out of ink, and tonight you're going to hear my side of it. So, dim the lights, tuck yourself in, and prepare for possibly the driest, slowest retelling of fairy tale architecture you've ever endured. Because if there's anything sleepier than medieval succession crises, it's zoning law. Now, let's float gently into the first violation. The whole saga began with an anonymous complaint, which, in the world of Woodland District compliance, is not unusual. Nobody wants to attach their name to a rat-out your neighbor call. And yes, in this case, it was literally a beaver. The kind who sharpens his teeth nightly and builds dams that would make the Army Corps of Engineers quietly weep. He's what we, in the office, like to call type A with a tail. The beaver claimed 3 brand new residences had appeared overnight on the Lower Woods cul-de-sac, with no permits, no approved blueprints and materials that, and I quote here, wouldn't pass inspection at a campfire cookout. That's not the most detailed tip I've ever received. But hey, a violation's a violation. And since I was senior inspector for Zone 4, it landed squarely on my desk. Just my luck when I arrived at the site, clipboard ready, tie already. Sweat stained, because summer in the forest is basically a sauna. The first structure greeted me. If you could call it that, it was straw, just straw. No framing, no foundation, no sheathing, not even so much as a single structural fastener. Imagine if someone sneezed into a hay bale and then declared it habitable. That's what pig number 1 was calling a house. And yes, it did technically have 4 walls. Though, in this case, walls is a generous term. They weren't load-bearing. They weren't even existing, really. I've seen scarecrows with more structural integrity. Per International Building Code 2021, Section 602. Load-bearing construction materials are to be of sufficient strength and durability to ensure stability. Straw, as it turns out, does not qualify. Shocking, I know. The only thing Section 602 might cover in this case is livestock bedding, which is not, I repeat not, an approved residential classification. When I confronted pig number 1 about this, he seemed confused, wide-eyed, innocent, the kind of look I usually get from homeowners who think their YouTube degree in DIY construction means they don't need permits. Straw is natural, he said. Eco-friendly, it breathes. Yes, it also collapses in a stiff breeze and attracts every insect within a 5-mile radius. But hey, sustainability, right? I jotted down my notes, took a few photos for the record, and informed pig number 1 that his structure would almost certainly be condemned within the week. He seemed not devastated, more like mildly annoyed, as though I'd told him his kombucha batch had soured. That should have been the end of it. But no, because next door was pig number 2. And let me tell you, if I thought straw was bad, sticks were worse. Picture this, a haphazard pile of branches, stacked together like a game of pick-up sticks abandoned by a toddler. No fasteners, no joinery, just hope. This wasn't a house. It was a suggestion of a house. Per IBC 2304. Wooden structural members are required to be durable, decay-resistant, and properly treated. Pig number 2 apparently thought decay-resistant meant fallen straight from the forest floor, with bark, termites, and questionable moss still intact. It was like living inside a bird's nest, if the bird was both lazy and deeply overconfident. Pig number 2, unlike his brother, was defensive. He insisted that sticks are classic. The people have lived in log cabins for centuries, which, sure, if you have logs debarked, squared, chinked, and assembled with actual carpentry, not a pile of twigs arranged by a woodland toddler after 3 espressos. His foundation was non-existent. His roofing material was more sticks. His insulation, you guessed it, sticks again. He seemed very committed to his theme. I marked it all down. Non-compliance with foundation requirements. No moisture barrier. Fire hazard of the century. The thing had so many gaps I could literally see daylight through. Every wall, I didn't even need to step inside to condemn it. I just stood there, sighed, and wrote, fail. Which brings us to pig number 3. Now finally, some progress, at least at first glance, because pig number 3 had gone for brick, actual, tangible, masonry units, not organic yard waste. For a moment, I felt relief. Maybe, just maybe, one of them had read a building manual, but of course not. The brickwork was uneven. The mortar was amateur, and the courses were laid without a level. If you've ever seen a pizza oven built by a drunk college student, you're in the right ballpark. Technically, yes, it was brick. Technically, yes, it had 4 walls and a roof. But that roof, corrugated tin, nailed directly into the mortar. Joints, which, in case you were wondering, is not how you attach roofing. Ever inside, the layout was chaos. No proper ventilation. No smoke flew for the fireplace, which, according to IBC 2111, is basically an invitation to carbon monoxide poisoning. The windows were crooked, the door didn't close, and I'm fairly certain the whole thing was sitting directly on the dirt with no slab, footing, or drainage plan. So, progress compared to straw and sticks. Yes, compliant with Woodland District Code, not even close. Now, under normal circumstances, I'd have written my citations, slapped a bright orange unsafe sticker on each door, and gone back to the office for a lukewarm cup of coffee. But this wasn't normal, because within 24 hours, the press got wind of it, and suddenly I wasn't just an inspector. I was a villain. The headlines read, "Big Bad Wolf Terrorizes Local Pigs." My personal favorite was predatory. Inspector huffs, puffs, and harasses innocent homeowners. Excuse me, I did no such thing. Huffing and puffing is not in the job description. The only thing I huff is printer toner when the office copier jams. But once the narrative stuck, didn't matter. I was the big bad wolf. The overzealous enforcer who bullied 3 little pigs who just wanted to live their minimalist woodland lifestyle. Never mind that those houses would have failed against the first stiff breeze of autumn. Never mind that woodland fire season was one spark away from disaster. No, the pigs became martyrs. I became the villain. and code enforcement. Well, nobody ever sides with the clipboard guy. And that, friends, is how the saga began. 3 illegal homes, 3 pigs. One increasingly exasperated Inspector Dot now, in fairness to the pigs. They were hardly the first woodland residents to try their paw or hoof at construction without a permit. In fact, I'd inspected dozens of such disasters over the years. Owls living in hollow trees without smoke alarms, raccoons converting dumpsters into lofts, a family of squirrels who thought acorn shells made excellent shingles. But the pigs were different. They had ambition, or at least they had stubbornness, which is close enough. So, as we drift further into this story tonight, let's take it slow. We'll move step by step, violation by violation, because nothing says bedtime quite like subsection the 2nd of January, 403 of the International Building Code, and trust me, we're only just getting started. So, let's float back in. We've got 3 pigs, 3 non-housers, 1 inspector who suddenly finds himself typecast as a fairy tale villain, and, of course, a growing list of code violations that could stretch from here to the enchanted swamp. Now, under procedure, once you cite a structure for non-compliance, you give the owner a chance to appeal or at least attempt corrective action. 90 days to submit plans, apply for permits, maybe hire a contractor who doesn't get his tools from a children's craft kit. In other words, plenty of time to do the bare minimum. The pigs, of course, had other ideas. Pig number 1, the straw enthusiast, decided to argue philosophy when I met him for his official compliance review. He had clearly prepared a speech. He called his straw hut a statement on sustainable minimalism, which, in plain English, means I don't want to buy bricks because they're heavy and expensive. He talked about airflow, about renewable materials, about how his organic walls were practically carbon neutral. He even handed me a pamphlet he'd printed on recycled paper, which, ironically, fell apart in my hands before I could read page 2. I explained very slowly that minimalism is not a zoning exemption. You don't get to ignore foundation requirements because you like the vibe of grass walls. You don't get to skip shear strength tests because your ancestors lived in mud huts. Unless those ancestors also filed a permit application, of course. Pig number 1 just nodded politely, then told me, with the calm smugness of someone who had clearly just discovered podcasts about tiny homes, that codes are outdated constructs of industrial society. I didn't even write that one down. I just underlined fail 3 times in my notes and let him bask in his straw-scented delusion. Pig number 2 was less philosophical. His stick shack had been cited for, well, basically everything. Lack of foundation, lack of fastening, lack of roofing, lack of sanity. But instead of appealing, he got defensive. He argued precedent. Cabins are sticks, he told me. Frontier settlers built with wood. My great-uncle lived in a log house, which, technically, is true. But again, I had to explain that logs are not twigs. Logs are cut, squared, and joined. What pig number 2 had was not a log cabin. It was a glorified squirrel nest. And while squirrels can get away with that kind of thing, human-sized pigs cannot. Pig number 2 waved his trotters and accused me of bias. He said I was targeting natural architecture. He said the building department was part of a brick lobby conspiracy. Apparently Big Brick had me in their pocket, which would have been news to me, since my office chair still had a spring sticking out of it, and my coffee machine broke in 2017. I told him, calmly, professionally, with all the monotone patience of a man who knows his pension depends on not screaming, that his structure would not survive a mild sneeze. He crossed his forelegs, snorted, and declared he would renovate it himself, which, let's just say, did not go well. Pig number 3, meanwhile, tried a different tactic. He was the responsible one, the brick guy, and he thought he could smooth things over by pretending to cooperate. When I inspected his renovations, I found he had, indeed, made changes. He'd added more bricks, in random places, sometimes stacked on top of each other, sometimes just scattered nearby, as though proximity alone increased structural strength. He also installed a chimney, which sounds promising, except he used stovepipe ducting from the discount hardware bin, jammed it into the roof with no flashing, and called it ventilation. When I pointed out that his fireplace still vented directly into the living room, he waved it off. "It's cozy," he said. "Open fire design. Yes, it's also carbon monoxide." But of course, pig number 3 had read enough homeowner blogs to think he was being clever. He asked if I'd grandfather his structure in, as though I had the legal power to say, "Sure, your death trap is fine, because you seem confident." I did not now. In most cases, this would have been routine. Write citations, issue deadlines, watch the inevitable collapse of non-compliant homes under their own weight. But this time, the media latched on, and oh, did they love it. Day by day, the coverage expanded. What began as a local gossip rag headline turned into full-blown regional news. Television crews set up outside the pigs' properties. Anchors described them as 3 brave siblings standing up against bureaucratic overreach. They called their hovels charming cottages. They called me a menacing enforcer with a history of huffing and puffing. Excuse me, I don't huff, I don't puff. I carry a clipboard, a tape measure, and occasionally a laser level. The only thing I blow is dust off outdated codebooks. But apparently Big Bureaucratic Wolf didn't have the same ring, so the nickname stuck. Big Bad Wolf. I tried ignoring it. I tried focusing on procedure, but the pigs leaned into their victim narrative. They gave interviews. Pig number 1 called his straw hut a revolutionary experiment in limpact housing. Pig number 2 compared his stick shack to the log cabins of our noble forebears. Pig number 3 insisted his brick hovel was up to code, which it very obviously wasn't, unless the code was written by blindfolded toddlers, and the public ate it up. People love an underdog story, or, in this case, an underpig story. 3 little guys against a big bad wolf. Never mind that the wolf was just a very tired inspector with a mountain of paperwork. Suddenly, I had protesters outside my office. Signs that said things like, "Let the pigs live free and down with code tyranny." Someone even mailed me a bundle of straw with a note. "Blow this down, oppressor. Charming." Meanwhile, the pigs doubled down. Pig number 1's renovations. He added curtains, bright floral ones, inside walls made of straw. Because nothing says fire hazard like adding flammable fabric to flammable walls. Pig number 2's renovations. He reinforced his shack with more sticks. He didn't even lash them together. He just leaned them up against the outside. It looked less like a house and more like a woodpile waiting for a winter bonfire. Pig number 3's renovations. He painted his bricks white, which, while decorative, did nothing for the structural instability. He also planted flowers around the front. I suppose he thought curb appeal would distract from the fact that his chimney was venting smoke directly into his kitchen. Every inspection I did, I wrote the same thing. Non-compliant, unsafe, immediate correction required. And every time, the pigs smiled for the cameras, played the victims, and carried on. At one point, I tried mediation. I sat them down, all three, with copies of the International Building Code open in front of us. I walked them through foundation requirements, fire safety, ventilation. I even drew diagrams. Pig number 1 doodled flowers in the margins. Pig number 2 argued about big government. Pig number 3 asked if he could just bribe me with homemade jam, which, no, I like jam, but not enough to ignore carbon monoxide poisoning, so the mediation failed. All the while, the circus grew. Late night, woodland comedians were cracking jokes about me. Some rabbit with a microphone compared me to a leaf blower. Satirical cartoons showed me in a suit, looming over tiny pigs clutching blueprints. And I just kept filing reports. Because here's the thing. When you work code enforcement long enough, you stop expecting gratitude. You stop expecting common sense. You just do your job, day after day, knowing no one will ever thank you for preventing collapses and fires. Nobody notices a disaster that doesn't happen until it does. But we're not there yet. For now, what you need to picture is this. 3 pigs, stubborn as royalty, each convinced their half-baked dream home is the hill worth dying on. Each playing to the cameras, while quietly doubling down on their terrible decisions, and me, just the clipboard guy, shaking my head, writing my notes, wondering how the woodland kingdom turned into a satire of municipal government. So, let's float to the next stage. Because if you thought the pigs' renovations were bad, wait until you hear about their legal defense. So, let's pick up where we left off. We've got 3 pigs, 3 condemned homes, and 1 increasingly exhausted inspector who just wants to file his paperwork, sip his lukewarm coffee, and fade into quiet obscurity. But of course, the pigs didn't let that happen. Because when you've lost the battle of construction materials, when your renovations amount to hang some curtains and lean more sticks against the wall, there's only one move left. You lawyer up the pigs hired counsel. Or, more accurately, they hired a raccoon in a very shiny suit. Raccoons, you see, make natural lawyers. They have quick hands, shifty eyes, and the kind of self-confidence that comes from digging through garbage and finding treasure. This one introduced himself as R.J. Raccoon-esque. He claimed he specialized in property rights. His business card had 3 different fonts and a clip-art gavel. Always a good sign. His opening statement at the preliminary hearing was simple. The pigs were being persecuted by an overzealous inspector who was misapplying codes meant for urban structures to rural, traditional woodland dwellings. In other words, the cultural heritage defense. My personal favorite. Let's break this down. Pig number 1's straw hut. According to RJ, it was a revival of ancient agrarian practices, deeply tied to woodland folk identity. Never mind that his client had built it in a single afternoon with bales bought off the back of a truck. Suddenly, it was a sacred expression of heritage, like weaving or folk songs. Pig number 2's stick shack. RJ called it a vernacular log structure, which is a very academic way of saying pile of sticks. He argued that denying its legitimacy was tantamount to erasing frontier history. Pig number 3's brick mess. That was evidence of innovation, a blending of traditional materials with modern design, a polite way of saying badly built pizza oven. RJ leaned hard into rhetoric. He compared me, your humble inspector, to imperial oppressors who crushed folk traditions in favor of sterile industrial conformity. I was, apparently, the enemy of freedom and the pigs. Brave rebels, it was nonsense. But nonsense plays well in court if you deliver it with enough hand gestures. Now, I came armed with the International Building Code, 2021 edition, plus the Woodland Amendments. I cited sections. I showed photographs. I explained why combustible. Walls plus floral curtains equaled tinderbox. The judge, a wise old owl who had presided over zoning disputes for decades, nodded patiently. He flipped through my documents with slow, deliberate talons. He understood, but then came the expert witnesses. First was the beaver, the same one who'd filed the original complaint. He came armed with blueprints, protractors, and the smugness of someone who sharpens his teeth nightly for fun. He explained, in precise detail, why straw and sticks lacked sheer strength, how wind loads would topple them, and how Pig Number 3's chimney was essentially a carbon monoxide cannon. He was correct, entirely correct, and yet his testimony had the unfortunate effect of sounding too competent, too professional, which, in the court of public opinion, translated to elitist meddler. The pig's lawyer seized on it instantly. So you're saying, RJ asked, that ordinary woodland folk cannot build their own homes without the approval of professional engineers? The beaver blinked. Well, yes, if they want the homes to be safe. And just like that, the courtroom gasped. Then came the pig's witnesses. Pig number 1 brought in a goat with an organic living certification. This goat ran a farm-to-table cafe and wore hemp overalls. He testified that straw construction was that natural breathability reduces toxic indoor air, and that structures must be judged not only by code, but by vibe. The judge scribbled something down. I prayed it wasn't vibe equals valid. Pig number 2 brought in a squirrel. The squirrel described at length how his family had lived for generations in wooden tree hollows. If sticks are good enough for us, he declared, they're good enough for pigs. I wanted to interject that squirrels weigh maybe 2 pounds and don't require carbon monoxide detectors. But protocol kept me silent. Pig number 3, not to be outdone, produced a hedgehog, who taught alternative architecture at the community college. This hedgehog praised the pig's creativity. He said building codes were rigid frameworks designed to stifle innovation. He described the brick house as postmodern, which, in academia, is code for doesn't make sense, but sounds deep. So there I was, clipboard full of violations, actual safety risks, and against me, vibes, heritage claims. A raccoon lawyer quoting folk poetry. Guess who the crowd believed? The pigs even staged a press event outside the courthouse. Pig number 1 stood in front of his straw hut with a flower crown on his head, speaking about reconnecting with ancestral traditions. Pig number 2 posed proudly by his collapsing shack, calling it resilient rusticism. Pig number 3 handed out homemade jam in mason jars labeled Support Local Builders. The cameras loved it. Meanwhile, I was caught on tape adjusting my tie and sighing into my clipboard, which, apparently, looked menacing enough to be looped on the evening news under the caption, "Wolf intimidates innocent pigs." Wonderful now, the legal process dragged on, as it always does. Hearings, appeals. More hearings. The pigs filed for heritage exemptions. They cited a rarely used clause about traditional dwellings in rural zones. Normally this clause applies to ceremonial huts or temporary shelters. The pigs argued their hovels qualified. I argued they did not, because ceremonial huts don't have permanent residents, and because straw curtains are not culture. The judge, patient owl, that he was requested a site visit, which meant all of us trudging back to the lower woods so His Honor could see the hovels himself. The site visit was, in a word, humiliating. Pig number 1 greeted the judge with herbal tea and insisted his straw walls had meditative qualities. Pig number 2 gave a speech about frontier grit, which was interrupted by one of his walls literally sagging mid-sentence. Pig number 3 offered a slice of pie baked in his improperly vented fireplace. The judge coughed from smoke inhalation but politely accepted. When it came my turn, I pointed at the sagging roof lines, the gaps in the walls, the fact that pig number 2's front porch was just 2 sticks leaned diagonally. The crowd booed me, yes. They booed the inspector at a site visit, because pointing out obvious safety hazards apparently makes you the villain. Afterward, the owl judge returned to chambers. He deliberated. He sighed. A lot owls are big sighers. And then he issued a compromise. Pig number 1 and pig number 2 were ordered to pursue stabilization efforts. Vague wording that essentially meant fix your huts a little, but not too much. Pig number 3 was ordered to improve ventilation, but otherwise allowed to keep his brick hovel standing. In other words, all 3 pigs were spared demolition. I was livid, quietly livid, of course. The kind of livid where you go home, sit in your chair and stare blankly at your paperwork while your coffee goes cold. But what could I do? The judge had ruled. The pigs had won. The crowd cheered, and I was the big bad wolf forevermore. Now, normally, this is where the story would end. 3 pigs, 3 non-compliant houses, a wolf inspector thoroughly defeated by the court of public opinion. But if there's one thing I've learned in 27 years of building inspection, it's this. Gravity doesn't care about public opinion. Fire doesn't care about heritage exemptions. And wind. Wind has no respect for vibes. And sure enough, a storm was coming. But let's not rush. Let's just float toward it, slowly, because before the storm, there was still paperwork. Always paperwork. So, after the courtroom theatrics, after the goats and squirrels and postmodern hedgehogs had all had their say, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would calm down. The pigs had technically won. Their houses stood. The judge gave them his blessing, or at least his owl-shaped shrug. The protesters had gone home, chanting about freedom and vibe-based housing codes. Me. I had my notes, my citations, my paperwork stacked neatly in triplicate, and I figured, all right, let nature take it from here. Because you see, after a while, in this business, you stop fighting people. You let the wind, the rain, the termites, and the passage of time do your job for you. No amount of philosophy can stop a rotting beam. No amount of jam jars can fix carbon monoxide and right on schedule. Nature delivered. It began as a gentle rain. Nothing unusual. The kind of soft woodland drizzle that makes mushrooms pop up and raccoons start washing things compulsively. But then came the wind. Not a hurricane, not a biblical tempest. Just your average late summer woodland gusts, 40, maybe 50 miles an hour. Enough to knock a few branches down, scatter leaves, rattle shutters. The kind of weather most properly constructed homes wouldn't even notice. But the pigs' homes were not properly constructed. First up, pig number 1, the straw hut had never stood a chance. I'd written that in bold letters in my original inspection notes. Fails against wind loads. Total collapse. likely. And sure enough, as the first serious gust rolled through the lower woods, Pig Number One's eco-forward dwelling behaved exactly like a pile of hay. The walls bent, the roof sagged. Then, in one dramatic but entirely predictable moment, the whole thing went airborne. A glorious golden puff of straw scattering across the district, clogging gutters, sticking to tree branches, and generally redecorating the woodland in rustic chic. Pig Number One stood in the rain, flower crown wilting, watching his minimalist dream dissolve into mulch. The news crews, of course, framed it as tragedy. Wolf's predictions come true. Was he involved? Excuse me. I was at home, drinking decaf tea, watching it all unfold on the 6 o'clock news like everyone else. I didn't need to huff or puff. The weather did my job. But the public, they called it sabotage. They said the big bad wolf had staged the collapse, as though I'd bribed the wind. If I could control the weather, I promise you I wouldn't be working zoning cases in Zone 4 next. Pig Number Two. The stick shack had a little more staying power. For the first half hour of the storm, it wobbled, it creaked. It looked, frankly, like a nervous deer about to faint. Pig Number Two stood inside, arms crossed, glaring out the window as though sheer stubbornness might keep the thing upright. Rustic resilience, he called it. Resilient, yes. For a nest, then, came the second gust. A particularly rude one. And the shack went down like a poorly set game of Jenga. Sticks snapping, roof caving, twigs scattering into puddles. Pig Number Two crawled out of the wreckage, soaked, furious, muttering about conspiracies. Again, the cameras swooped in. Headlines followed. Wolf's critics proven right. Sabotage suspected in shack collapse. I didn't touch it. I wasn't there. But somehow my name trended on woodland Twitter for abusing structural physics. I assure you, physics is not on my payroll, which leaves Pig Number Three. Now, I'll admit, I thought the brick hovel might last. It had materials, at least. Actual masonry, not livestock bedding or woodland debris. But workmanship matters. And Pig Number Three's workmanship. Well, let's just say you can't stack bricks like Lego and expect miracles. As the rain poured, the mortar began to wash out. Improper ratios, improper curing, no water seal. The roof leaked almost instantly, pooling water inside. The stovepipe chimney rattled like a kazoo, and yet somehow it held. Not well, not safely, but it held. Pig Number Three emerged the next morning, smug as a king. The cameras loved it. Brick beats bureaucracy, the headlines crowed. Never mind the gaping cracks in the walls, the puddles in the kitchen. The fact that one corner of the house had sunk an inch into the mud to the public. Pig Number Three was vindicated, and me, I was, again, the villain. The post-storm coverage was relentless. Pig Number One gave tearful interviews about losing the home of his soul. Pig Number Two shouted about government weather manipulation. Pig Number Three posed triumphantly in front of his sagging brick walls, declaring himself proof that codes are meaningless. Meanwhile, I filed incident reports, calmly, patiently, documenting collapses, citing unsafe remainders, recommending demolition before someone got seriously hurt. The department ignored me. Too much bad press, too much political pressure. Nobody wanted to be the office that tore down the hero pigs. Last standing home, so the unsafe brick box remained. And here's the thing about unsafe structures. They don't get better with time. Moisture seeps, foundations sink, cracks widen, roofs sag. Gravity is patient, and pigs, bless them, are stubborn. Pig number 3 refused repairs. He called every problem character. He gave tours of his historic home. He painted over mold with cheerful colors. He insisted the leaks were natural humidifiers, and the media ate it up. Now, you might think this is where I'd swoop back in, that I'd march up, clipboard in hand, and finally tear the place down. But no, I'd learned my lesson. Inspectors don't win against public opinion. You can't. Cite away stubbornness. You can't enforce common sense when people are determined to admire the rubble. So I just watched. I documented. I let time do its slow, inevitable work, and in the quiet of my office, with stacks of files around me, I thought about every unsafe house I'd ever seen. The ones that leaned, the ones that burned, the ones people clung to because pride outweighs practicality. The pigs weren't special. They were just loud. Of course, none of this stopped the rumors. Even years later, I'd hear whispers. Didn't the big bad wolf blow those houses down himself? Didn't he have some vendetta against the pigs? No, I didn't. I just had a job, and maybe that's the sleepest moral of all. Sometimes it's not malice. It's not sabotage. It's not even bad luck. It's just physics. Straw doesn't stand. Sticks don't last. Bad bricks crack. And inspectors, we're not villains. We're just the poor souls stuck writing it all down. So, as you drift off tonight, remember this. When you hear the story of the 3 little pigs told in sing-song, bedtime rhyme, with a cartoon wolf blowing houses down, just know the truth was far duller. It wasn't a wolf's breath. It was zoning violations, moisture damage, and a few unremarkable gusts of wind. So, we've trudged through the straw, the sticks, the bricks, the storm, and, of course, the never-ending blame. You might think that was the worst case I ever worked. The infamous one, yes. The most publicized, certainly. But the worst, not. Even close. You don't spend 27 years in woodland code enforcement without collecting a few horror stories. Not the exciting kind. Just slow, inevitable disasters of poor choices and worse construction. The kinds of cases that don't make headlines. Because nobody cares about a raccoon's loft collapsing when it isn't caught on film. So tonight, let's float through a few. Quietly, gently, like a stack of incident reports sliding across a dusty desk. First up, the raccoon loft incident. Raccoons, as I've mentioned, are natural lawyers, but they're also natural scavengers, which means when they build, they don't buy materials. They collect them. This particular raccoon family decided to convert an abandoned dumpster into a modern urban loft. And yes, they used that phrase. I know, because they carved it into a wooden sign they nailed above the door. Urban loft. Living, with a raccoon paw print logo. The loft consisted of 2 dumpsters pushed side by side, covered with a corrugated metal roof. No insulation, no ventilation, just the smell of 20 years of garbage baked into steel walls inside. They'd installed furniture made from broken chairs, half a mattress, and a stack of pizza boxes that functioned as both seating and food storage. For plumbing, let's just say the corner with the bucket doesn't need describing. I cited them immediately. Fire hazard, sanitation hazard, general violation of everything resembling human decency. They appealed, of course. Their argument, adaptive reuse. They said dumpsters were underutilized urban spaces, and they were simply upcycling, The judge sighed. He ruled for demolition. The raccoons protested. They chained themselves to the dumpsters, chanting slogans about freedom and creativity. And then, during the second week of hearings, the floor gave out. Both dumpsters collapsed into themselves. The raccoons were fine, if indignant. But the urban loft dream was over. To this day, they still blame me next. The squirrel treehouse fires. Squirrels, unlike raccoons, don't hoard garbage. They hoard acorns. And sometimes they hoard ambition. This particular squirrel family decided they wanted a grand tree. Nothing wrong with that. Tree houses can be safe if done properly. But they didn't hire a carpenter. They just nailed things to a tree until it vaguely resembled a structure. They added rope ladders, swings, multiple levels. They stuffed acorns in every crevice, because of course they did. And then, to make it cozy, they installed a wood stove. In a treehouse. A functioning, burning stove. Inside a wooden platform, suspended in a tree. I sighted them instantly. Fire hazard. Obvious. They ignored me. Said I was overreacting. Said their ancestors had lived in trees forever. 2 weeks later, the inevitable happened. A spark jumped, the stove flared, and the treehouse lit up like a matchstick. The squirrels escaped, tails singed but otherwise unharmed. The acorns, not so lucky. We counted 25 bushels roasted. The smell lingered for weeks, and the squirrels, they still glare at me in court, as if I set the match myself. Then there was the owl tower collapse. Owls, in theory, should know better. Wise, solemn, endlessly patient, or so the stereotype goes. But wisdom, I've learned, doesn't always translate to construction. This particular owl wanted height. He wanted a tower that looked down on everything, so he built one, out of stacked stones. No mortar, just rock on rock, balanced like a child's toy. It rose 20 feet into the air, wobbled constantly, leaned ominously, but the owl insisted. It was stable. The Romans built arches without mortar, he told me. This is the same. It was not the same. One morning, after a week of heavy rain, the whole thing toppled. Stones everywhere. The owl escaped, though his pride was permanently dented. His tower dream lay in ruins. He blamed me, of course. Said my negative energy caused structural instability, as though pessimism is a load factor in the building code. And who could forget the goat? Spa collapse, yes, a goat spa. This herd of entrepreneurial goats decided to convert a hillside cave into a luxury wellness retreat. They advertised mud, baths, salt scrubs, and authentic goat yoga led by actual goats. They excavated with horns and hooves. They carved rooms into the hillside with no shoring, no support beams, nothing. Just empty space in soft earth. When I inspected, I told them collapse was inevitable. They nodded politely, then offered me a complimentary salt lick. 3 weeks later, the roof caved in. Fortunately, the spa was empty at the time. But the goats insisted it was sabotage. They filed a complaint. They said the wolf inspector willed it to happen, because apparently gravity and erosion are under my personal jurisdiction. End MO. Of course, the infamous Frog Palace flood. Frogs love water. Too much, sometimes. This particular frog king decided he wanted a palace on the water, not near it, on it. So he built a sprawling wooden deck over a pond, complete with towers, bridges, and a throne room platform. It looked impressive for about a month, until the water rose, until the supports rotted, until the entire palace sagged into the pond, leaving the Frog King perched on his throne like a captain going down with his ship. I had cited it for lack of floodplain compliance. He'd ignored me, of course. The aftermath, headlines about a tragic loss of cultural heritage. Protesters demanding reparations for amphibian architecture. Me, once again, blamed for not protecting a structure I'd specifically warned would collapse. Typical, you see the pattern. Every unsafe structure eventually fails. Every stubborn builder eventually blames me. And every headline writes the same story. Inspector Wolf destroys innocent dream. But here's the secret. I never destroy them. I don't need to. Time, weather, termites, and fire do that for me. All I do is write it down, patiently, monotonously, with a pen that always runs out of ink halfway through subsection citations. And after nearly 3 decades, the files blur together: pigs, raccoons, squirrels, goats, frogs, different species, same stubbornness, different materials, same collapse. So why, you might ask, does the 3 Little Pigs incident stand out? Because it had cameras. The raccoon dumpster loft never made the news. The squirrel treehouse fire was a footnote. The goat's bar collapse barely. A whisper, the frog palace flood a two-day curiosity. But the pigs, oh, the pigs knew how to work a crowd. They gave interviews. They cried on camera. They wore flower crowns and handed out jam. They made a story out of it. And in the end, it wasn't about construction, or safety, or code. It was about narrative. The big bad wolf against 3 innocent little pigs. That's what stuck. That's what people remember, not the details, not the mortar ratios or the foundation requirements. Just the bedtime story version. And that's fine. Stories are what people want. Sleepy, simple stories, like this one, so as you drift a little deeper tonight. Remember, the 3 little pigs weren't the only violators. They were just the loudest, and me. I'll keep telling the quiet version, the one with zoning clauses and collapse reports, the one that puts you to sleep, because in the end, that's all code enforcement is. Slow, repetitive, predictable, and just a little absurd. You know, after nearly 3 decades in the woodland building department, I've noticed something. Inspectors are always the villain. Always. Nobody writes a fairy tale where the inspector shows up, gently checks the rafters, and quietly saves everyone from a roof collapse. No one tucks their kids into bed with, once upon a time, the code official kept you safe by citing the exact load requirements for a second-floor balcony. It's never that. It's always the wolf. The bad guy, the bureaucrat. I get it. Villains. Make better stories. You can't sell picture books about subsection 503.4 of the Woodland Building Code. You can't market a coloring book where children shade in the correct dimensions of an egress window, so, instead, you get me. The big bad wolf, huffer, puffer, destroyer of porcine real estate. Never mind the paperwork. Never mind the process. Never mind that I filed every citation in triplicate and recommended remediation plans that nobody followed. No one wants to hear about that. They want the wolf. It's funny though. I never thought of myself as big or bad. Just tired. Just thorough. When I started, I actually believed in the mission. Safe homes, strong structures, a woodland where no one gets crushed, roasted, or flooded out. Idealistic, maybe, but it sounded noble at the time. The reality, most days were just endless arguments. The beavers hated me because I cited them for over. The rabbits resented me because I told them burrows weren't compliant habitable spaces. The foxes tried bribery constantly. Fish, poultry, the occasional gift basket, I declined. Always and every time something collapsed, burned, flooded, or fell apart. They looked at me as if I had personally willed it. As if my pen was cursed. It wears you down. People sometimes ask why I never took a different job. Why not go into private inspections, or consulting, or literally anything that doesn't end with your name turned into a bedtime threat? The truth is, I thought about it, but in Woodland, once you're typecast, that's it. If you're the wolf inspector, you'll always be the wolf inspector. You can't rebrand. You can't pivot. Nobody's going to hire you to babysit ducklings or run a flower shop, so I stayed. Besides, where else was I going to go? The city, too loud. The mountains, too isolated. No, Woodland was home. Irritating, ungrateful, exhausting, but home, theirs. An irony, though, for all the complaints, all the protests, all the editorial cartoons of me looming over trembling woodland creatures. Not one of them actually left after my inspections. The raccoons rebuilt. The squirrels built again. The goats tried a second spa, this time with marginally better shoring. The frogs returned to the same pond with sturdier posts. They grumbled. They shouted. They pointed their little paws and hooves and wings. But they stayed, which means, in some stubborn, roundabout way, they trusted me, or at least, they trusted the system. Still, I can't escape the reputation, big bad, always. Capitalized. Always accompanied by that same tired story. Do you know how strange it is to walk into a classroom for outreach sessions? Yes, we did those, to teach safety and see children clutching coloring books where your face is drawn with red eyes and jagged teeth. Imagine trying to calmly explain load-bearing beams while the students giggle and whisper about how you blew down the pig's house. It's demoralizing. I once tried to correct a teacher, politely said, "Actually, I didn't." Blow it down. The structure failed under environmental stress. She nodded, then told the kids, "See, children. That's exactly what the wolf would say. You can't win." Sometimes I wonder how history will remember me. Not the bedtime story version, the real record. The memos, the citations, the reports stacked floor to ceiling in the Woodland Records office. Will anyone ever read them? Will anyone notice the margins filled with my notes? Will anyone care that I recommended safer materials over and over, only to be ignored? Probably not. History prefers drama, villains and heroes, straw and sticks and bricks, not the quiet monotony of an inspector filling out Form 17B. There's another side, though. A quieter one. Every now and then, someone thanks me, usually in private. Never in public, too risky, socially. But quietly, at the edge of a hearing. Or after a long day in the field. The rabbit who told me my warning about ventilation saved her kits. The beaver who admitted my citation prevented a downstream flood. Even one of the pigs, yes, one of the actual pigs, sent me a note, years later, saying he realized I wasn't the monster the papers made me out to be. It was short, just, "Thanks. Sorry about the whole wolf thing." I kept it, tucked in a drawer. A little reminder that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely wrong. But then bedtime stories got involved. Do you know what it's like to see your entire career reduced to a nursery rhyme? A cheerful sing-song tale about how you terrorized innocent, Homeowners, I've sat through puppet shows, shadow plays, animated shorts, all with the same script. The pigs, innocent and clever. Me, snarling, drooling, scheming. The irony is almost poetic. I spent my life trying to keep buildings upright, and in the end, the only thing that stayed standing was the myth, sometimes. On quiet evenings, I imagine rewriting it, not the code reports, not the appeals, the story itself. What if it were told differently? What if, instead of a big bad wolf, there was just an overworked inspector doing his job? What if the pigs weren't clever heroes, but stubborn violators who cut corners until reality caught up? Would anyone listen? Probably not. It wouldn't sell. Too boring, too bureaucratic, and yet it would be true. That's the real divide, isn't it? Stories versus truth. Stories are simple. Heroes, villains, straw, sticks, bricks. Truth is messy. Permits, codes, appeals, court dates, and nobody falls asleep to truth. They fall asleep to stories, which is why I'll always be the villain. Do I resent it? Some days, other days, I accept it. Villains are necessary. Without me, the pigs don't look clever. Without me, the houses don't get tested. Without me, there is no story. And if that's my role, to be the bedtime monster, the bureaucratic menace, the huff and puff inspector, then so be it. At least the roofs don't fall as often anymore, I suppose. In a strange way, I've made peace with it. You can't fight stories. You can't appeal to the court of folklore. You can only lean back, sigh, and let the narrative wash over you. And maybe, just maybe, whisper the truth in the margins for those who care to listen so. As you're drifting off now, remember, I wasn't big, I wasn't bad, I was just tired, a wolf with a clipboard, and that's all I ever was. So here we are, the end of the line. Retirement. After 27 years of citations, hearings, and huff and puff allegations, the Woodland Building Department gave me a plaque, a cake, and a polite handshake at a conference room with flickering fluorescent lights. The plaque read, "For dedicated service in code enforcement, 1996 to 2023. No mention of pigs, no wolves, no bedtime stories. Just sterile, engraved lettering, as if my career were no more complicated than a box of old files." I kept the plaque anyway, hung it crooked in the den. The cake was dry, for the record. Vanilla sheet cake, too much frosting. I ate one polite slice and left the rest in the break room. By afternoon, the raccoons had taken it. And just like that, I was done. Retirement isn't dramatic. No parades, no confetti. You just stop showing up. 1 week you're standing in a muddy field with a clipboard, glaring at questionable roof. Trusses. The next week you're sitting at home, staring at your own roof, realizing you no longer have to care if it collapses. Not that mine would. I built it by code. Overbuilt it, really. Steel reinforcements, double bracing, weatherproofing. Layers that would make FEMA weep. My house could survive a tornado, a flood, and probably a direct hit from a lumberjack with a grudge. Old habits die hard. So what do you do with yourself when you've been the villain for a quarter century? At first I tried hobbies, wood carving. Too ironic, the beavers laughed. Gardening, too many rabbits. Bird watching, birds don't respect. Property lines, fishing, boring. Eventually I settled into walks. Long, slow walks through the woods. Sometimes I'd pass old inspection sites. A rebuilt dam, a burrow I once condemned. A spar with newer, sturdier supports, and I'd pause, hands in my pockets, and think, maybe it was worth it. Of course, the reputation followed me into retirement. At the market, little chipmunks would point and whisper, "That's him, the big bad wolf." Parents would hush them, then give me a polite, nervous smile at the tavern. The bartender still jokingly asked if I wanted my drink huffed or puffed. Even the mail came, addressed sometimes to BB Wolf. Big bad division. You can't shake folklore. It sticks like pitch. But in retirement, it stung less. With no hearings, no reports, no deadlines. I could let the whispers float past me like gnats. If the world wanted a bedtime villain, fine. I could be that quietly, from a distance, sipping tea on my porch. I do get letters, though, mostly from young inspectors. Fresh recruits, wide-eyed, convinced they'll change the system. They ask for advice. They ask how to deal with angry homeowners. They ask how to handle being the most hated creature in the district. I tell them the truth, that it's thankless, that nobody will remember their careful notes, their meticulous citations, that they'll be painted as villains, no matter how right they are. But I also tell them that years later, someone will quietly thank them, and that quiet thanks is worth more than all the fairy tale scorn. I kept journals, too. Not for publication, I'm not naive. Nobody wants a memoir called Load-Bearing Nightmares, Confessions of a Woodland Inspector. But for me, stacks of notebooks, field sketches, lists of common violations, occasional doodles of pigs in hard hats. Sometimes on cold evenings, I reread them, not for nostalgia, more for reassurance. Proof that I existed. Proof that I tried, because memory fades. Stories twist, but ink stays. There are days I do miss it. The work, the routine, even the arguments. There was a rhythm to it. Wake up, strap on the tool belt, clip the badge to the vest, march out into the woods to face whatever nonsense some woodland resident cobbled together overnight. I miss the smell of fresh sawdust, the groan of a structure settling under inspection, the satisfaction of catching a hidden violation before it turned deadly. I even miss the hearings, in a strange way. Standing there, accused, explaining calmly that no, I did not terrorize anyone. I simply cited Section 302.5 of the International Building Code. It was absurd, infuriating, exhausting, but it was mine still. Retirement has its comforts. No more paperwork, no more appeals, no more headlines with my name twisted into rhyme. I sleep later. I read more. I spend afternoons watching sunlight shift through the trees. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear children chanting the old rhyme. I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house down. And I smile, because they don't know the truth. They don't need to. The story is enough for them. The truth is mine, quiet, tucked in reports and journals, and that's fine, once in a while. Someone knocks on my door, a young piglet, a squirrel, a frog. They ask politely if I'll look at their treehouse, or their dam, or their pond deck, just to check, just to make sure it's safe. I always do. No clipboard, no citations, just quiet advice. Add more bracing here. Seal the joints. Don't forget ventilation. They nod, wide-eyed, as if receiving secret wisdom from a legend. And I suppose, in their eyes, they are not the big bad, just the old wolf. Will history remember me kindly? No, history prefers the bedtime version, the rhyme, the villain. But maybe, years from now, someone will find an old notebook or a forgotten citation and realize there was more. And if not, that's fine too, because in the end, houses still stand longer now. Roofs leak less, chimneys draft better, and maybe that's enough. So, if you're still awake, unlikely, but possible, here's my final report. Not to the department, not to the appeals board, not to the pigs or the papers, just to you. The houses failed because they were built badly. I was called big and bad because it made a better story. And I did my job. That's it. Retirement is quiet. Tea on the porch, walks through the woods, the occasional polite request to check a treehouse beam. I fade into the background. The bedtime rhyme continues without me. And somewhere, 3 pigs, now older, grayer, maybe wiser, still tell the story of how they outsmarted the big bad wolf. I let them. It makes them feel clever, because the truth, they were never my enemies. They were just bad builders. And I was never big, never bad. Just the wolf with the clipboard. And that's all. Time to set down the pen. Time to let the story end. Sleep well.